Hi, I'm Sinead,
I'm Kora.
and this is Coffee Table Daydreams.
Welcome.
Welcome! Thank you for coming back.
Episode 2.
Episode 2, baby! We are here and we are happy to be here.
Yes.
First of all, we're very excited for today's topic. It's something that we both really relate to. Hitting a wall and kind of what that means for you as an artist or a creative or someone who's in a process of work who is finding a lack of inspiration or motivation. And I feel like, heck yeah, I've been feeling that. I think sometimes it's like I feel that and then I forget. I was just feeling that because there's a moment of inspiration, but then these days it's hard to maintain that.
Yeah. And knowing when to take a break and to actually reset, because there are times you need to push and you need to just make something or just do something for the sake of creating it, and then there's times where it's like, you know what, I'm just gonna take a step back and focus on where I'm at.
Yeah, totally. I really want to know, Cora, like when you feel that you are kind of, let's say you're in the process of writing a project, what is your go-to method when you feel like you can't like continue that story, or maybe there's a more common block that you experience? What do you do when you experience like that kind of need to distance yourself from your work or lack of juices?
It's tough because I feel like my solution, like most of the time, is to distance myself from it. Just because it's that artist brain of like hating what you're doing eventually.
Yeah.
You're like, you get too immersed in it, and then, you know, of course, first drafts of a screenplay are not going to be good, you know, objectively. And that's the hardest thing to push through when your brain is like, no, this is not worth it, or I don't like the story anymore, all this stuff.
Yeah, so you're describing the block being like your internal monologue or like your internal critic.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I find that most often, especially when it comes to writing specifically, it's most often that internal, like, negative self-talk that starts saying, like, why are you doing this? Why are you working on this? What's the story even about? Or, like, is it worth it? All that stuff. And then, so sometimes it is, okay, I'm gonna come back and look at this with fresh eyes. Or it's, I am just going to write words, and I'm going to try, despite, you know, everything that my brain is telling me, to bypass that moment of extreme self-criticism, and just see what happens. And that ultimately, like, no matter what comes out of that, that feels good because you're just creating something.
Yeah, like, I think what's really interesting is I've never kept any physical, like, journal that I've, like, written in. I mean, maybe I'll keep it, like, for a few months while it's kind of in circulation, but any notebook or journal that I put any kind of writing into or thought or feeling, even to go so far as that, I throw it out later. Like, I have this weird compulsion, and I know that I literally have OCD though, so it's like, right, maybe that is part of that. But outside of that, I think that there is like this natural feeling to like hide your vulnerabilities, and for me it was never like an anxiety thing that I usually experienced with other things, but more that it was like this way of kind of making all my thoughts private or making my bad ideas private. And I'm somebody who always is writing. I'm always writing notes down or scribbling on paper, but I don't like to keep it because later it's hard to kind of give yourself the patience that you need too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like, yeah, you just getting in your own head about the work that you're doing. Like, I feel that even with writing a journal, you know, like that feeling of just being authentic is really is surprisingly difficult when you're always judging yourself in some way, or you're holding on to that feeling of like, is it supposed to be this way or these words. Like, yeah, I find if I'm stuck in one place, like if I'm typing on a computer, then I'll go and try to like write something physically down, or, you know, move out to like music, like picking songs that I feel like resonate with a story, or just listening to music for inspiration, or looking at art or something, just like changing the perspective or changing the view you have on whatever it is that you're working on.
Yeah.
I find kind of helps break you out of that sort of stagnant mindset.
You know what's something with what you said that kind of came to mind for me? It's like a tactic I have sometimes with writing in particular. When I'm really focused on characters and I feel like I'm not really connecting with the story or the character, I sometimes kind of remind myself, like, you don't have to like the character. And that is like one of these things that obviously, like, it comes into play with like people who are antagonizing your protagonists or your characters that you like in your story. You're gonna be like, oh, these people are villainous. But it's like to allow your characters to not really be likable, or to like write something and not try to make it like agreeable or polite or sympathetic, like to kind of just allow it to exist. And even if you don't like it, know that there's more to it than that. And like, I don't know, like it's something I struggle with.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like letting, in the same way that you have to let humans exist with perfections and imperfections and everything in between, because humans are humans, it's the same way, and that characters need to exist along the full spectrum of being who they are and who they end up being in that story. And like, that's a tough thing, and I think there's a pull to like make people likable in stories because you want to spend more time maybe with that person, but it's not necessarily real, you know. It's that's something that can't be lost in storytelling, is that, you know, real isn't perfect. It isn't always what some might view as correct, or, you know, objectively the right thing or the wrong thing. Like, that's not a story, that's not a full character. Yeah, so I think like it's such a process getting used to like sitting with those characters who you might not agree with and still have to write them, or you might not like them as a person if you imagine them that way, but they still have to exist in that story.
Yeah, you know, with that, I wonder if you also feel like when you watch TV or you watch a film, the stories that you gravitate towards are those stories that kind of imitate more of the subtlety and imperfection, leading almost towards, I don't know if you feel like this, but I think you and I can both relate on stuff that almost verges on boring at times, because it's imitating like the natural moment of silence, or how things take time and the pacing, because I know pace is something that you bring into your filmmaking, I think, a lot. Yeah, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, like, I resonate with that a lot, with, like, because there is also that push to, like, what is entertaining, you know? There's that feeling out there of, like, you have to make the entertaining choice, you know? And I find, like, that personal thing for me is you know, gravitating towards stories that are real in some way or another, or that come from that authentic place. And I enjoy it when I'm sitting in a theater and I feel bored or I feel like, or I feel those moments are happening in the life of those characters on screen that are like silent moments, or moments that seem to take forever that do in real life, you know.
Yeah.
I love that. I love it when it's real, because real is often not entertaining or polished. So I really appreciate that, seeing that on screen.
I think that it's hard too when popular media kind of thrives on shine and sparkle and clean editing that's very fast and like keeps the pace up, and everybody watching almost comes away from it a little bit more happy or a little better, because whatever you're watching, I think for a lot of people I know it, and for myself, it's sometimes to like take yourself out of, maybe you feel sad, or maybe you feel like your life is boring, and so you turn on something that's a little more exciting or a little more frightening or something that adds extra. But it's hard to think about like what I watch that I just turn on, that I'm like, these moments of peace, and like, but no, it's those ones that really, the films and the moments that grab you, that you recognize like, oh, this is special and different and actually kind of looks like and feels like what that is actually like to experience.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's the beauty of like storytelling, is that there's a place for everything. Like, everything has a purpose because it exists, and like there's you know, a wonderful place for entertaining, fast-paced, you know, things that do let you kind of come away with that sort of uplifting feeling. There's a place for the real gritty, you know, sometimes dark or real stories, and everything in between that. In the same way, the same way that there's a place for every person's perspective on life. And that's the great thing, is like, I have, you know, shows that I rewatch hundreds of times because they're like that escape, or they're funny and, you know, intriguing, or they're uplifting. Like, you go between all these different things.
I'm very much obsessed with this idea of like a moment, or the feeling of a moment, and the lighting of a moment, and the kind of essence that exists in that. And when I think about this and relating it to film in like a way that, and describing it in a way that's not very technical, but that it's more just, there's an essence, or there's a moment that exists that I'm in here, and to recreate that in film, there's a lot of like intricacy and depth and like simple choices that really can kind of share that with someone, and shooting a scene can change that completely. And I think for anyone who's listening to the podcast who's not a filmmaker, it's still relatable, because there are films and shows that I put on that I just want to get to that one moment that they set up where they establish it, and it's so happy and joyful, or it's so cool and suspenseful, and then when you get to it, you're like, oh yeah, like I totally can see that moment, or am present with connecting to that in some way.
Yeah, you think about moments in films, and like it's cool to draw that parallel to like other artists or like other types of art, because I don't know, I love the idea of diving into a moment, because a moment can be infinite. And in the same way that, you know, an artist would paint a scene, and that moment in that scene is forever. Like that is like a whole world, and like you start thinking about that with like storytelling, or, you know, something simple, and like bringing to like one moment in a story, or one moment in a character's life, and thinking that is like a whole world in of itself. It just opens up so many doors, like possibilities of things.
Yeah, you know, like I watch Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I don't and like when they're in like a holosuite, or they're like, that idea of being able to just step into a designed space, like, and I know we've got a lot of technology and VR, and the path to that becoming something that we experience is not as long as I feel it is, but it's crazy to imagine like being able to step into a film, or like step into a movie, and to get that in a more like physical feeling. Like it's crazy to imagine, and maybe this is a little, oh my gosh, you'll never guess. As we were recording, my hand is on my leg, and it made a fart noise. Like a loud one.
Perfect. That can be
I don't know, like it's a good excuse, I guess, but anyway, technology, what's it gonna be like?
Guys, technology.
Guys, this is sci-fi time. I don't know.
We like to call this segment sci-fi time.
Well, you know what? Like, I with all the conversation that we're having right now, I'm thinking about how I've spent the last few days like painting weird props for one of our upcoming projects, and there's part of me that's kind of like, oh my god, I'm painting these weird things, and people are gonna see this in a film one day, and they're gonna be like, whoa, someone put time into that thing in the background at this like birthday party scene. But it's kind of cool. Like, I love the films that have that and have those little details. So yeah,
you're creating a world. It's a whole different reality almost. Like, that's very cool.
Back on the first topic about kind of pushing through our blocks, or finding and identifying them. What is something that, if you could like talk to yourself in those moments, like send a message to yourself and have that reminder, because I think that there are people who will listen and relate to what we're talking about. What are some of the things, or what's a conversation you wish you could have with yourself?
I would say it's okay. You can let go of the expectations of any part of this, because it's creativity, and there are no expectations, and to take care of yourself, that's first, and that informs the art in the end, and find what feels natural to do, and find alternative things, if it makes more sense in that moment to you to change the medium that you're working in, then do it. you know, start drawing if you want to, start writing in a journal or typing or whatever it is. It's all okay. Like there doesn't have to be a thing that results from the thing that you're doing necessarily.
Yeah. The best part might be the process, and the result can be kind of besides the point.
Yeah, the result can be anything. The result can be you learning something about your mental health or learning how to deal with a creative block. It doesn't have to necessarily be a product. Yeah.
Nice.
What would you say to yourself?
What would I? Wow. Honestly, it wouldn't be much different than that. That's the funny thing is like, I think it's more just that reassurance that there is a judgment bias towards your own perspective, and it's really hard to be as considerate and kind to yourself as you would to the people you care about if they were dealing with the same thing. Like, so
Yeah, I find it's always a good check, especially like I know with the negative self-talk, anybody who can relate to that, it's always a good mental check to say, what would I say to someone who's going through the same thing, who is a friend or someone that I loved? Because that just reframes it in such a huge way, especially when it's so ingrained, that negativity, perhaps. Like, that can change it, because of course, you know, it's a friend, it's someone you love, you're going to be gentle and kind and approach it with love and you know, that you deserve that as well.
It's interesting to think, like, if a child said, what do you think about this thing that I made? You wouldn't tear it to shreds and like with your words and criticism and dissect all the ways that it's wrong, because some children don't make great art. Some of their art is just a bunch of brown paint smeared together because they mixed like everything onto the page and they didn't mean to dump all the brown on top of the yellow, and then they're like, now I got no more yellow. And the kids just, you know what, it's like, no, well, they had so much fun playing with that paint and the color, and they loved the way it transformed and changed from yellow to when they added the brown paint and saw how they mixed. And it's like, the kid doesn't care about hanging that on their wall. And there's something so beautiful to think about ourselves as like a child for a moment and consider how we reinforce our own insecurities with our criticisms, or how we can build ourselves up with like that slow practice of just letting yourself have a little bit of room to fail and just make weird art or listen to strange music and dance really terribly for a while, and then just be like, okay, that actually was great and I didn't get anywhere from it, but it sure felt good.
Yeah, I think like remembering that play isn't result based, and like everybody should have play in their lives, and creativity is a really great way to have that in your life.
Totally.
And nothing necessarily has to come from it.
Yeah. On that note, thank you everyone for tuning in to episode 2.
Episode 2.
We will be coming into your ears shortly.
Phrasing.
That sounds really creepy. Anyway, this has been Coffee Table Daydreams.
It has. We'll catch you next time.